Welcome back to Fossil Ridge Games. Today I am very excited to walk you through the game of Arks. I'm going to give you a basic how to play set of rules. I'm also going to walk through basic strategy tips on how to survive this epic game. In addition to the core and base game, you're going to see some of the cards from the leaders and lore pack as we explore this fantastic game. Arks is a 2 to 4 player highly competitive game which takes place on this amazing looking board. The purpose of the game is to amass the most amount of power ranging from chapters 1 through 5. A chapter is going to be a series of turns that you play, and at the end of each of these chapters it's going to kind of reset the game a little bit. You're going to get fresh cards and things of that nature. You're going to score points. Overall, what you're trying to do is amass the highest number of power points. At the bottom of the board there is a power tracker. In addition to that, there is a variable length of the game dependent on how many players are actually in it. The game requires less points if you have 4 players, and then there's an intermediate amount at 30, and then finally at 33 if you're only playing a 2-player game. Once one of the power tracker cubes from one of the players breaches the appropriate value, it's going to trigger the end of the game. Everybody has until the end of the current chapter to play and therefore score points. The setup for the game is going to be facilitated with a small deck of cards. Please notice that there are anywhere from 2 to 4 aliens on the back of each of these cards, so get the corresponding number of cards for however many players you are playing, and either randomly select one of these cards or have all the players pick. There are different configurations on these cards. Go ahead and follow the setup instructions as indicated in the rulebook. Basically what you're going to do is take 3 ships in one of your cities, place them in one location. So as an example, the 1A player would place 3 ships and 1 city at the 1A location. At the 1B location, they're going to take 3 ships and place a starport. And then finally, at the 1C location, which is going to be out in the center, they're going to be placing 2 ships. Each of the players will go through this process. And then depending upon if you're using leaders, they can randomly take a leader either from this deck, or there's a drafting portion of the game where you're going to be taking a set of cards, so a set of leaders. I'm just going to pull 4 of them out. So if we're playing a 3-player game like we have set up, we would take 4 of the leaders and place them out onto the table and perform a draft. In addition to that, there is a set of lore cards that are present also in the game. So I'm just going to go ahead and shuffle through this deck. You're going to take also the same number of those cards. So if you're playing a 3-player game, take 1 more than what you are actually playing and then put them out onto the table. You're going to go through a drafting process. Once the drafting process is completed, each player will have a leader and a lore card. And this is where kind of the variation of the game really comes in, and this is something that really shines in my opinion. You're going to have these sort of unique combinations that can occur, and that's what makes the game different and fun. So every time you're going to have a different leader, and then you're going to have a different lore. Each of the leaders is going to have a bonus and sort of like a detriment. So they do something really well, and then they do something really awful. So just keep that in mind as you play over the course of the game. And then the lore card is going to be just typically a benefit that you could use. So what's fun about it is that every time you play, it's going to be totally unique and different, and it's going to have a unique feel and theme to it. If you are a fan of the game Root, you know that there's this asymmetric part of the game that makes it really exciting. Not everybody has the same stuff, so to speak, and the same way of playing the game. So all of these lore cards and all of these leader cards are going to bend the rules a little bit and really give it kind of a fun and unique theme. Before, I mentioned that there is an expansion for this game, and basically it's just a set of cards, so I'm going to go ahead and throw it onto the screen really quickly. This is called the Leader and Lore Pack, and quite honestly, all this is just a collection of additional leader cards and lore cards. So it says on the back that it's going to contain 8 leader cards and 14 additional lore cards, and that's kind of what you're looking at right here. It just adds to the variation. So I think it's worth picking up that expansion if you are into this amazing game. First thing that we're going to focus on is how to score points in this game. What's kind of cool about ARCS is that there's a variable way to score points, and that's going to occur over the course of the different chapters. As we mentioned before, there are 5 different chapters in the game, potentially, that can be played. Each chapter, you're going to have the potential to play up to 3 ambitions. And what does that mean exactly? I'm going to go ahead and grab one of these ambition markers and kind of zoom in on it. At the top of the ambition marker, there is a 5, and then below it, there is a 3. The top number, that is the larger number, indicates the number of victory points scored for the player that wins that ambition. And then next below it, those are the points scored by the player that has the second highest number of whatever that is for that ambition. Also notice that these are double-sided. On the back side of these markers is an orange face, and there are larger numbers on the back side of this. Over the course of the game, specifically at the end of a chapter, what you're going to do is flip the lowest number marker. So as an example, if we transition from chapter 1 to 2, at the end of that chapter, we're going to go ahead and take this marker and we're going to flip it over. And what's going to happen is we're going to now organize the ambition markers in descending order. We're going to have the highest number 1, then the second highest, and then the third highest. And then when we go from chapter 2 to 3, we're going to take the 3 marker, we're going to flip it over, and then a 6 is going to appear, and we're going to continue this all the way through until all of the markers are turned over. What that means is over the course of the game, you can score higher amounts of power points, which are essentially your victory points for the game, as the chapter increases. So it's kind of cool. It accelerates the way and the amount that you can actually score. So I'm going to flip them back over, and we're going to simulate what to do when the game starts and how to actually get these ambition markers onto the table. A little later on in the video, I'm going to talk about how to play a lead card, a lead action card, and subsequently declare an ambition. But at this point in time, I'm just going to walk you through what the ambitions actually do and sort of what you're trying to do for each of the ambitions. So notice at the top, we have some different icons. It looks like an oil barrel, and then we also have this cube. This is going to be the Tycoon ambition. If this ambition is declared, so let's say an ambition is declared, this kind of gives the players an idea of what they need to compete and actually collect over the course of the game. So what I like to do is I place all of the resource icons in the center of the board so they're easily accessible to all the players. So please notice that we have 5 different types of resources. The resources are going to be placed onto your player boards. So there are these circular positions at the top of your player board. As an example, if you obtain a resource, so I'm just going to go ahead and zoom back a little bit. Here's your player board. So let's say you gain one of these fuel resource tokens. You're going to take this and you can place it onto your board in one of the open circular positions. Notice that some of the circular positions are covered by cities. As you start placing more and more cities out onto the table, it's going to expose more locations for you to put more and more resources. It's unlikely that you would get 4 fuel, but I'm just going to go ahead and put it out. So then as an example, if you pop this next position open, then you can place 2 additional markers down and so on and so forth. So here's kind of what the name of the game is when it comes to Tycoon. What you're looking for is to amass as many material resources, which are these cubes, and to amass as many fuel resources as you can. In addition to that, we have some additional cards with these same icons on it. So notice that we have guild cards, and I'll talk about how to get these into play later, but I'm going to zoom in at the top and notice that there's fuel icons and material icons also located as well on this. So if we're playing the game and one of our ambitions is going to be Tycoon, we want to amass as many fuel icons as we can, and we want to amass as many material icons as we can. I'm going to pop back over to the ambitions and just kind of point this out again. So this is what we're looking for. So at the end of the chapter, we're going to go through a scoring phase, and the player that has the highest number of these 2 is going to get 5 points, and then the player with the second highest number of these two icons is going to score 3 points. Now you might be asking yourself, well, that's great, but what happens if there's a tie? So I'm going to go through that really quickly. So let's say the two top players each have 3 of these icons combined. They would actually tie. If you have a tie for first place, you drop down to the second place reward, and both of the players get that reward. In this case, there is no secondary reward since there was a tie. Now, if we have it a little bit backwards, let's say we have the top player, let's say has 5 of these markers, and then the next 2 players each have 2. The first player would take the 5 points, and then the 2 next players, since they tie for second place, they would receive 0 points. So that's kind of how you can score these different ambitions, and it's going to give you power points on the power tracker. So to be clear, you can declare the same ambition multiple times if you want. So it is possible over the course of the game that you could have the only ambition played for a given chapter ranging from anywhere from 1 to 2 to all 3 of the ambition markers in the same spot. Now, typically that's not what happens, and as this starts to unfold, maybe somebody takes Tycoon, maybe somebody takes Tyrant, and then maybe somebody takes Warlord, or a variable combination. So this is kind of the name of the game, and what makes it kind of fun is that these ambitions, and there's 5 of them total, and these 5 ambitions will be shifting around over the course of the game. And it depends also on which chapter you're actually playing. So you can play anywhere from up to 1 to 5. Typically, seems like the game ends really in the 3 to 4 range, but sometimes it goes to 5. Next, we're going to talk about the Tyrant ambition. As an example, if somebody places one of the ambition markers onto Tyrant, what you're looking for over the course of that chapter is to amass as many captives as possible. And where are captives tracked? That's going to be on your player board itself. So I'm going to go ahead and just zoom out a little bit. Please notice at the bottom of each of the game boards, you're going to have 2 different sections. You're going to have one called trophies, and that's for destroying pieces. And so that can be things like destroying, let's say, starports. You can also destroy things like cities. You can destroy a whole host of different things over the course of the game. So let's say cities, you can also destroy ships. Those are going to be claimed as trophies. More importantly, if we're doing the Tyrant ambition, we're going to look for captives. So the blue player can actually take captives, and these are going to be the agent markers. So I'm going to go ahead and just zoom in on one of these. These are little alien meeples that they have throughout the game. These are going to be used predominantly to track the different amount of influence that a player has with a certain guild. So you can see at the bottom we have guild cards, we also have box cards. I'll go through this a little bit later. But the more that you have over here, the greater the chance that you can take this card and bring it over and start using it for your faction. If you take some of these cards, though, you can grab captives of the other player, of the other player's color. And as a result of that, they start building up in this captives box. So if the Tyrant ambition is actually brought into play, now what you're going to do is, at the end of the chapter, you're going to see who has the most number of captives. So as an example, the player that has 3 captives, this blue player, would score the first position. Then we go down to our yellow player board. Notice that they have 0 captives. So once we reach the end of the chapter, the person that has the highest number of captives will win this, and then the person with the second highest number will win that as well. And then we're going to apply the rules for ties as we did before. Notice next that it says captives return in cleanup. If the ambition is not declared, so as an example, if the blue player is taking captives over the course of the chapter and the Tyrant ambition is not declared, at the end of the chapter, the captives don't go back to the supply. Now, if at the end of the chapter you have this cleanup phase, then all of these captives are going to go back to the corresponding player's supply. So these 2 would go back to the yellow player's supply. This one will go back to the white player's supply. I'm going to go through some strategy later on how to sort of lock down other people's ships and agents, which is pretty obnoxious. It's more of an advanced strategy, but you can really lock down how people play these. Next, we're going to talk about the Warlord ambition, and this is going to be just simply how many trophies a player has amassed over the course of that chapter. So as an example, the blue player has been combative and has been fighting with the other players. The blue player has taken 2 different ships as trophies, and then has taken these 2 different buildings as trophies as well. So thus the blue player has 4 trophies total. At the end of the chapter, if the ambition is declared, you're going to check to see who wins that ambition by just simply the player with the highest number of trophies. Next up, we have Keeper and Empath. And this is a pretty easy one to score, and it's pretty much identical to Tycoon that we talked about previously. In the game, we have several different resources. We have 5 total. So I'm going to zoom back to the center. And this is just where our game group keeps all these icons. I'm going to move this out of the way. And look, you have 2 different markers that are located on the screen. This is going to be the relic marker, and then below it we have a psionic marker. So we're going to go ahead and zoom back over to Keeper and Empath, and please notice that these resource markers just simply match the iconography on the board. So as an example, if the Keeper ambition is declared, you win if you have the highest number of these relic markers. If the Empath ambition is declared, you want to amass as many of these psionic markers as you can. And just take into account that things on cards, such as guild, so as an example, notice that this guild card has a relic icon on it. So if the Keeper ambition is declared, you want to amass as many of these icons as possible. It's pretty simple because all of the icons match. So the next strategy tip, I'm going to call it cornering the market. Each of these resource tokens, there's only 5 of each one of these. And when you look at the different ambitions, and I'll go ahead and just scroll over them real quick. So Tycoon functions with the fuel and material icons, but we also have Keeper and Empath. And what you can do is, if you even have 3 of these markers, you can kind of keep them on your resource board and you don't spend them. And what happens is that only leaves 2 for the other players actually in the pool. So when you're playing a game of Arcs, it's pretty easy for these pools to become depleted. So specifically on the Keeper and the Empath type of resources. And what that means is that if you have 3 of these over the course of the game, you can actually kind of lock down different ambitions and you can keep scoring them over and over again. So like as an example, if you're this player right here, you just keep these on your player board so nobody else can have them. You're essentially just locking that resource down. In addition to that, you can also get guild cards. And so guild cards will also have various resources on them. So like as an example, these 2 guild cards have material resources on them. So by just having anywhere from 3 or more icons of a given sort of resource, and that's going to be fuel, material, but especially on the relic and the psionic types of resources, you can really lock it down and just keep scoring it over and over and over again. Now that does make you a target for theft, so that will kind of annoy the other players and they'll come after you and they'll try to use raid dice essentially to steal some of those resources from you. And that's fine, but if you can score just a few times and lock down the market, it's a huge advantage in the game of Arcs. Now we're going to dive into the action deck. And what I've done is organized on the table some important information for you to take a look at. First, notice that I have kind of 4 sets of cards, and they're going to range anywhere from 1 to 7. And if you look at the top hand, left-hand corner of each of the Arc action cards, there is going to be a number, and it does range from 1 to 7. Below it is a certain number of pips. The lower the number of the card, the more pips that are going to appear on the card. If you rotate the card and zoom in, notice this is going to say aggression. So aggression is the suit for this card, and notice that the card is red. So all of the red cards are going to be aggression cards, and there's going to be 4 different suits in the game. Underneath it, it also has what the different actions that you can perform when you select this card itself. So notice it says battle, move, or secure. What that means is that I have 3 pips, 1, 2, 3, and thus I can perform 3 of any of the actions that are listed here. Thus I could battle, move, or secure. Every time I do one of these actions, it consumes one of the pips until I don't have any pips left. What you're going to see on the table is that there's 4 different suits of cards. So we already talked about aggression. Next, I'm going to bring administration up onto the screen itself. Notice that this is a 2, and you can see that this one has 4 pips located on it, which means you can perform 4 actions. We're going to zoom in, and this is going to be administration. It says tax, repair, or influence. Please notice now at the bottom left-hand corner of the card, so all of the cards, with the exception of the number 1 cards, will have what's called an ambition at the bottom left-hand corner. We've previously talked about ambitions, and this is how you get these ambitions into play. You have to play a corresponding card such as this, and what you're going to do is play it as the lead card. I'll show you a little bit later what that means, but this is going to allow us to declare the Tycoon ambition. So if you remember, we zoom on over to the game board, and please note that the icons are going to match. So you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of the action card, that's going to match the icons right here. That's how you know that you can select that corresponding ambition. Going to move this back over. Please notice now we have the orange suit of cards. This is going to be the construction style cards. Notice that we have a 6, and we have only 2 pips on this card. Construction is going to allow you to build or repair, and then notice we have an ambition in the bottom left-hand corner. This one's going to be empath, which matches on the ambition track. Finally, we have the sort of blue-green suit right here. This one has a 7, and notice it has this icon located on this card. This is going to correspond to the initiative marker. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring this onto the screen for a second. That was the initiative marker. Next up, we have 1 pip, which means we can perform one of the following actions. We can move or influence. And then notice at the bottom left-hand corner of this card, there is a question mark for ambition. What that means is it allows you to declare any ambition, any of the 5 ambitions that are present in the game. When you are playing a 2 to 3 player game, your action card deck is going to only have cards ranging from 2 to 6, so I'm going to cover up the ones on the flank. If you're playing a 4-player game, you're going to have action cards that range anywhere from 1 to 7. And please note that the 3s, 4s, and 5s are just off the screen right now, but they exist as well. So just understand that the number range can vary based upon the number of players. Let's start talking about ambitions and how to play a lead action card. Where we're positioned is at the bottom left-hand portion of the game board. So now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so that we can see kind of what's going on. Please note that we have this tile that's sitting on the game board. It has a 0 on it. It says ambition declared. We're going to keep that right here. And then we also have a position that basically says, here is the lead card. And there's text on it that says you may declare the ambition on your card. So I'm going to go ahead and pop it back to the other position at the corner. Now we've already talked about action cards, so now I'm going to talk about how to play a lead action card. We previously briefly mentioned this marker right here, so this is going to be the initiative marker. When we start a round of play, the player that has this initiative marker has the advantage of playing what's called the lead card for that round. So what does that mean? It means that the lead player can go into their hand of cards and they can select from their hand of cards what they want to play for that game round. So as an example, let's say we have the lead player has these cards in their hand at the start of this phase. What that means is they have to select one of these 4 cards to play as the lead suit for the game round. Now, there's a lot of sort of choice that goes into that, and the first thing that I'm going to talk about is, since you are the lead player, it gives you an advantage because it allows you to essentially play out one of these ambitions. So what we talked about previously is that ambitions are the only way in the game that you can score points. So if we look at the bottom left, we can see that this player has the opportunity to put out really any ambition onto the table because they have a question mark. They can also play out the Tycoon ambition. They can also play out the Empath ambition as well. So the lead player just simply has to select one of these cards. So as an example, what we're going to do is take this card. It's going to be an administration card, and please note it has a 2 in the top left corner. So we're going to say, yes, we're the lead player. We're going to rotate the card, place it onto the board. Now at this point in time, you as the lead player can decide if you want to just simply play this card and then you're going to play out all 4 of your actions, or what you can do is you can take this marker and you can put it onto your card and cover up the top of the card. Notice that it has a 0. The 0 is then going to nullify whatever is in the top left corner of the card. So in this case, it's a 2. So when you put this ambition declared marker on the top, it basically zeroes it out. And then it goes into play. What that means is that if this player declares an ambition, you are going to go over to the board. And we did notice that it was the Tycoon ambition, and all you're going to do is take the highest scoring ambition marker and then you're going to place it into the corresponding box, which is going to be Tycoon. We're going to say that the lead player placed this administration card into the lead position during this round. And now notice that there are 4 pips. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of these pips. What that means is that the player that placed this card into play gets to do up to 4 actions. You don't actually have to do all of the actions on the card if you don't want to. And you could do any combination of what's actually located on this card. So please note it says things like tax, repair, or influence. So I will go into, in subsequent clips, what all those actions actually mean. But for this intent and this purpose of this clip, we're just going to say, hey, do 4 of these, and then it's going to pass on to the next player. So as an example, the player placed this down, they declared an ambition, and notice it has a 0 listed on it. What this means is that the lead suit for this round of play is going to be administration. So any other player that's downstream should think about playing an administration card to sort of maximize what's happening in the game. So as an example, let's say this is the next player's hand, and they have 2 aggression cards and an administration card. Notice that it has a 6 located on the top of it. So when you're playing a card of the same suit that's the lead, you have to try to exceed what the lead card's number is. So in this case, it's a 0. So if a subsequent player wants to place this down, they can go ahead and do that, and they're going to place it in the box that's located on this portion of the game board. So notice that the 6 is going to exceed the 0. So that is a legal play. And if a player does that, then they can play all of the actions listed on the card. So in this case, the next player could play up to 2 actions from the same suit. And that would be a huge advantage. Here's where things get kind of crazy and a little bit messy sometimes. You don't necessarily know what's going to be in your hand. So as an example, let's say that the next player, this is what they have in their hand. Notice that they have 0 gray cards, so they don't have the ability to actually play an ambition card, an administration card over the course of this turn. So they're going to have to select something different. So next we're going to go into an example of copying or pivoting. You're going to notice on the left-hand side of the game board, there is going to be a box, and it has 3 different words listed on it. It has surpass, copy, or pivot. In the previous example, we showed that you had to exceed the number on the lead card. So thus a 6 was played, and that exceeds the 0. That's called surpassing. So in the previous example, we went ahead and we surpassed. Now what we did notice too from the last clip is that we had our player, and unfortunately that player does not have any gray administration cards in their hand. So thus they have to do something different. They either have to copy or they have to pivot. And what's nice about this game is it kind of gives you a reminder on the actual game board what that means. So in the first instance, we're going to say that we are going to take a copy action. And what we can do is the player that is next in line doesn't have any administration cards, but they do have these cards. They can select one of these cards and place it face down in this box and copy one of the actions of the lead card itself. When you do a copy action, it doesn't matter what the number is, you're just gonna get something out of your hand and use it. So as an example, we have this 6 card, which is a mobilization card. We're gonna take it, we're gonna flip it over and place it face down in this box. So in this case, we just performed a copy action. All we're going to do is simply copy one of the actions that's on the card. Now please note that although this card has 2 pips on it, we're only going to get 1 action pip for doing a copy action. So we're basically kind of losing and missing out on playing additional pips because we're doing a copy action. So once I place this down, I can copy any of the 1 actions that are listed on this card itself. So we can tax, we can repair, or we can influence, but we can only do one of those. So in this case, the next player, let's say they do a tax action by doing this copy. Now we're going to move on and we're going to talk about pivot. Next up, we're going to talk about pivoting, which is another way that we can play an alternate card as opposed to whatever the lead suit for the round is. We're going to go ahead and just backtrack and say that this is the next player's turn and this is what they have in their hand. So they still have 2 mobilization cards and a construction card in their hand. Next up, we're going to pivot. Pivoting allows you to play 1 action on the card in your hand as opposed to something that's on the lead suit itself. So in this example, we're going to take the same card. It's going to be this mobilization card, and we're going to place it face up in this box on the table. What this means is that I can play 1 action that's on this card, and that's it, essentially. So instead of having to copy the suit, I get 1 action that's on this card. So as an example, we're going to go ahead and zoom in as best as we can on this thing. Hopefully it picks it up. Okay, we're going to move or influence, but I don't get both pips on the card because I'm doing a pivot action. So I'm going to place it face up here, perform one of those actions, and then it moves on to the next player. So now is a good point in time to kind of talk about overall strategy. So when we do a copy or when we do a pivot action, we're only going to get 1 action off of this card. So we're going to miss out on potentially doing more stuff on your turn. That's kind of interesting. So when you think about it, you get the most number of actions if you match the lead suit that has been played for that game round itself. So the game kind of favors you trying to play the lead suit or play cards against the lead suit every round of play because it really maximizes the amount of actions that you have. When you think about that, and then when we pull into context the fact that you might not have in your hand a corresponding card that matches the suit, this is where a lot of the strategy in the game starts to take off. When you start each chapter, you're going to have 6 of these action cards in your hand, and that's what you're going to be playing over the course of the chapter. So you have to be very strategic on when you play each of those cards. So if you play something out a little bit early, it might then deplete you for later rounds because you won't have the matching color. You won't have the matching suit of what's being played. So there's a lot of strategy to it when it comes down to it. And probably the best way to experience it is to actually play the game. And after you play just a few rounds, it really embeds in your head that you have to be super careful and cautious when you put down any of your action cards into play. It's time to clarify a couple of rules. The first one is that if you play the lead card, you do not have to declare an ambition. So in this example, we played down the Administration 2 card into the lead slot. We did not declare the ambition, which means that the number that you have to beat for all subsequent players is a 2. And so you can see that then the next player plays a 6. Now, there's also a subtlety, and I see a lot of confusion with new players. The third player, let's say, puts down a 5, and a lot of players feel like this is not essentially a way to play the game, and they're thinking that they're violating the rule. Please note that when you're playing a card, you only have to beat the card in the lead suit. You don't have to beat anything else that's been played over the course of the game round. So as an example, the 5 exceeds the lead card of 2. but it does not exceed the 6 that was played previously to it. It's perfectly acceptable to put this 5 card into play, because all you're trying to do is beat the lead card. You don't have to beat every other card that's been played down into this box previously. So I see a lot of confusion with that, and sometimes players hold back and they don't actually play the 5 because they think that they have to beat the 6. You don't. You just have to beat whatever the lead card is on that suit. Next up, we're going to talk about the initiative marker, and I went ahead and just placed it onto the game board. And please note that the initiative token can have 2 different positions. It can have when it's laying down, and it can also have when it's standing up, and that means 2 different things in the game of Arcs. As an example, at the end of a game round, which means that every player has played an action card or they've passed. So in this case, we're saying that we have a 3-player game, and notice that the lead card was an administration card. At the end of the game round, the player that has the highest number that corresponds to the lead suit will actually take the initiative marker itself. So in this case, where we have a 2, a 6, and a 5 being played, the lead suit for the game round was administration. And we have the second player, so it's the player after the lead player, played this 6. The 6 is the highest in the lead suit, so thus they would take the initiative marker and they would be the lead player for the next round. So what does that mean? In the next round, this player that played the 6 would have the opportunity to play down this lead card and then also be able to play an ambition. The initiative token is extremely important. If you do not ever have the initiative token, you won't be able to play the lead card, and thus you won't be able to declare an ambition. So declaring ambitions in the game is how you score points. So thus, getting the initiative token allows you to select an ambition that fits your playstyle. It also fits whatever it is that you're doing in the game and allows you to score points. Gaining the initiative is thus very critical. Next, we're going to give a quick example on how to somewhat steal the initiative marker, and this is a really good example of a way to play an additional action card and thus ensure that you're going to gain the initiative token itself. This initiative marker will sit with the first player in their area until it's either basically stolen, and that's not an official game term, that's just a term I'm using, or until the end of the round, and whoever has the highest number that matches the lead suit will take it. So as an example, we've got a 2, a 6, and a 5 being played. So when we get to the third player, there really isn't a way that the third player can beat the 6 because they don't have the 7 in their hand. But what they can do is they can look in their hand and take an additional action card and put it basically face down onto the game board. And what that means is that they can steal this initiative token. Now, when they take the initiative token, they're going to put it in their play area and they're going to put it down on the table. And what that does is it signals to other players that somebody has basically taken the initiative marker for that game round. What that means is that at the end of the game round and you're checking to see who has initiative for the next round, you don't actually look at the highest card that was played. If somebody played an additional card, they get to take this marker and put it into their play area. At the start of the next round, they're just going to simply take the initiative marker and they're going to put it face up so it's standing up on the game board, and they're going to put it in their play area. And as an example, then they get to play the lead card and then the game then progresses. So I want you to think about this real quick. If this player that has the 5 burns an extra action card to take this initiative marker, they won't have as many cards to play over that chapter. So kind of what I mentioned before is that at the start of a chapter, you're given basically a hand of 6 cards that you can play over the course of that chapter. So if you spend an additional card to take this initiative marker, then basically you can only play a maximum of 5 rounds in that chapter. And then let's say you steal the initiative marker an additional time, so maybe then you lose another one on a different game round that you're playing. Thus, you have even less actions to play over the course of that chapter. So really think of it as when you're trying to steal this initiative marker, probably try to steal it so you can declare an ambition. That's the best way that you can do things in this game. And if you kind of overuse this mechanism, it might be a detriment to you. But by the same token, if you have really control over some resource in the game and you're pretty confident that you can score that ambition multiple times, you might try to take this initiative marker a few times over the course of this chapter by spending an additional card, because it's going to net you a ton of points. Here is a quick clarification on initiative. As seen on the screen, this is an example of a 3-player game where the lead card played is administration. And then notice that a 6 and a 5 are played, but they are not of the administration suit. So thus we have construction and we have mobilization. Although the numbers 6 and 5 beat the 2, it has to be of the same suit in order to gain control of the initiative marker. At the end of this game round, if no other administration card has been played, the initiative marker is retained by the lead player. That's actually kind of an interesting mechanic. So think of it this way: if you're not playing cards of the same suit, you're basically letting the same player control the game and really set the tone of what they're playing as a lead card. And that can be a little bit problematic for you. So as an example, even if you, so you can copy or pivot. If you're doing any of these copy or pivot actions, you're not allowed to really take this initiative marker unless you're going to spend an additional card to do so. There's a lot of strategy, especially toward the end of game rounds, and I've seen multiple players do this. They'll try to kind of take control of that chapter. So let's say they've declared an ambition or 2 that's in their favor. What they'll do is they'll play cards in this lead position. So as an example, they'll start playing cards that are higher in number in the lead position to kind of pressure the other players into not being able to play against that number. So a really good strategy, especially later on in the rounds, if you've got any 6s or 7s in your hand and you want to maintain control of the initiative marker and kind of force players to follow what you're doing, this is a good way to do it. So if you play a 6 in this position, that means that everybody downstream has to play a 7 in the construction suit. And guess what? There's only one of those cards in the game. So the fact of the matter is you're forcing your opponents to either pivot or copy, and that's going to make it almost impossible for them to take the initiative marker unless they're spending additional cards. So this is a good way to start depleting actions for your opponents. So there are a lot of players that I've noticed, and we've played this game probably about 10 to 12 times, I don't know, somewhere in that range. And I noticed that some of your players toward the end of the chapter, they keep some of these high cards so that once they take control of initiative, they're kind of like bullying the other players and they are setting the tone at the end of the chapter, which is kind of an interesting strategy because it's kind of locking them down and making it hard for them to maximize all of their actions that they're performing. I'm going to put a quick rules clarification in. This doesn't actually happen all that often, but it does on occasion, and I want to clarify what happens. There are 7s in the game, and if you notice, the initiative marker is sitting right next to the number. What this means is that if you play this 7, it has to be of the same suit. So if you play the 7 of the same suit that's the lead card, you actually take this initiative token, you're going to put it face down in your area. And what that means is if you play a 7 at any point in time, nobody in the subsequent part of the game round can take this from you because it's laying down in your area. So it's kind of the same thing. It's like the same mechanic if you, let's say, like play a card with an additional one, and you take the marker and you put it face down. If you ever play the 7 during the course of putting cards down, you immediately take this and it's going to give you the initiative marker on the next round. I'm going to start walking you through some terminology that's important to understanding ARCs. We're going to talk about the term control and what that means to control a planet. What I've put onto the screen currently is there's a planet and there are 2 different factions present at the planet itself. Notice that we have an armada of yellow ships and we also have an armada of blue ships present at the planet. When we talk about the term control, what this means is that you have to have the highest number of fresh ships at a planet to have control of it. Ships can be in 2 different states. They can be fresh or they can be damaged. As an example, the blue player has 1, 2, 3 ships in the fresh state, which means that they're undamaged. They're sitting basically on the game board, kind of like face up. Now, if a ship suffers damage, so if this fresh ship right here suffers 1 point of damage, you're going to rotate it to its side. So this ship is now laying on its side. It is considered a damaged ship, not a fresh ship. So in this example, we're going to see who has control over this planet. We have 3 fresh yellow ships present at the planet, and in this case we have 1, 2 fresh blue ships that are present at the planet. So when we look to see who has control over a planet, it's the highest number of fresh ships at a planet, not necessarily the highest number of ships total. So in this case we have 3 fresh ships to 2 fresh ships on the blue side, thus the yellow player has control over this planet. I see a lot of new players get kind of confused. They just look at the game board, they're like, oh, blue has control over that planet because they have 4 ships. Well, guess what? 2 of them are damaged, so they can't actually help you control a planet. Now, they can still partake in combat and they can still be destroyed, but they cannot actually help you control a planet, and that's an important part of the game. So as another example, let's say if we have this situation. In this case, we have 3 fresh yellow ships and we have 3 fresh blue ships. Now remember, to control a planet, you have to have the highest number of fresh ships at that planet. So in this case, 3 versus 3, neither faction controls the planet. So neither the yellow nor the blue player actually control this planet. Now that we have a basic understanding of some of the core game mechanics, we're going to dive into the specific actions that are appearing on the action cards. I have on the screen a construction card from the construction suit of cards present in the game. Notice that we can take one of 2 different actions on this card. We have the build, and then we also have the repair action. I'm going to go ahead and go through the repair action very quickly because I think it's definitely easier to understand. So we're going to go back to our planet that we were just talking about, and if we want to repair a ship, we can spend 1 of the pips on our construction card to repair a ship. As an example, let's say the yellow player played the construction card. We're going to spend 1 of the pips on our card, so 1 of these right here, to do a repair action. All we're going to do is just take a ship and we're going to take it from a damaged state and we're going to put it up onto the game board in a fresh state. That's going to consume 1 of our pips. Now what's interesting about repair, and I think this confuses some players think that they have to have either a starport or a city to perform a repair action. You don't. You can repair anything wherever it is on the game board itself. Something else that we should have a quick conversation about is that starports and cities can also be in a damaged state. They can also be in a fresh state. So as an example, if one of these tokens is face up, and notice that it's kind of solid color specifically on all of its edges, this means it is undamaged and it is fresh. Whereas the one that is sitting on the planet, notice that it has sort of these black edges. That means that it's damaged. We can also repair some of our buildings as well. So all we have to do is just flip it over and then it becomes a fresh building. Now we're going to talk about the build action, which appears on the construction cards itself. Build can be 2 different things. You can either put a building onto the game board, or you can place a ship onto the game board, and each of these actions is going to consume 1 of the pips on your action card itself. So as an example, we have this planet in which the yellow player controls it. They have 3 fresh ships. The blue player is present. They only have 1 fresh ship. Notice that we have now sort of a new piece that's on the table. This is a starport. So I'm going to go ahead and point to the starport. Starports are important to slingshot ships as part of a movement action. I will show you that a little bit later. And they're also important as part of a build action as well. So each starport during each of your turns during a round can produce one ship. So as an example, if we spend one of the pips on this construction card to build, it allows us to build one spaceship. So I can take this and I can put the ship down, and I have to put it down at the same planet as one of my starports. Now here's one of the caveats, and I see some of the confusion with this. If I build, each starport can only build once per each of these cards that I play. So although I have additional pips on my card, I can't just keep producing ships over and over again at this planet. Now I can do that if I have, as an example, 2 starports. So if I have 2 starports at a location, I could in fact build an additional ship to that location, but I'm really kind of capped to only building 1 ship per card that I play based upon the number of starports that I have. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that from the board, and we're going to kind of reset this planet. Something else that we can do is we can build essentially buildings. So as one of these actions to build, I can go ahead and use one of the pips to put a building onto a planet that has an open position. So notice that this planet has an open position. And I can build buildings if I just simply have pieces present. Now, if I don't control the system, those pieces are going to come into play damaged. So as an example, let's say the blue player, in this case, has 4 fresh ships at this location. If I were to build a ship, it would come into play damaged. If I were to build a city, that city would come into play damaged as well. So having control over a system really helps you determine the amount of health that whatever it is you're building actually is built. So things are damaged if your opponent controls the system. We're going to go ahead and reset the board, pull these things off, and kind of give another example. So using one of my pips, I could also put down a city. Why are cities important? Cities are important because you can tax them. So one of the actions in the game, specifically on the administration cards, is that you can tax a given planet and then obtain a resource. So this one's going to produce fuel. And I'll get into a little bit later how that actually works. But you actually have to be able to tax a city. You can't tax a starport. Starports just simply produce ships, and cities will help you produce resources. Next up, we're going to talk about mobilization cards, which is this bluish color of suit that's present in the game. The first type of action that can be performed is a move action, and then it also allows you to influence. We're going to go back and take a look at our yellow player right here. And what we can do is move our pieces almost as like a fleet. So if I wanted to, if I take a move action, I can either move 1, 2, or 3 of these ships, and I can move them as a group. So it's not going to consume a move action per ship. It's going to consume a move action as kind of like a fleet moving through space. So as an example, if I want to take some of these yellow ships and move them from this planet to a neighboring planet, it would consume 1 pip to move any number of ships from one planet to the next one. And specifically notice that these are adjacent planets because there's a very thin line between them. If I move over into this area of the board, so let's say I had my ships right here and I wanted to move them from this planet to this planet, I can't actually go through this because there's this dividing line. It doesn't actually allow me to do that because they're not considered adjacent. So if I wanted to move in that direction, I would have to move basically from this planet out to what's called a gate. And you can see the gate has the number 4 listed on it, so I'd have to go from here. Next, I would have to move up to gate number 5, and then finally I would have to move over to this location right here. So some of the boundaries that we see on the game are definitely very important, and you can't cross some of those boundaries. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of refine this movement a little bit more by having a conversation about it. So if I wanted to use one pip, I could take any number of ships and move them from one location to another. I could also then use a second pip to take this ship and then move it over to this adjacent location as well. I could use one move action to take this ship and move it out into the gate area as well. That's what's basically called traditional movement. It's a very simple sort of way of moving. You just move from one location to the next. The second type of movement is called a catapult move. Sometimes people call it a slingshot move. And this kind of like represents you throwing your fleet through space at a really high speed, and it thus can travel really great distances, so like a catapult move. So catapult moves can only occur from locations or planets where you have a starport present. So let's say you have a fleet of ships, and you can continue to move until you have some sort of interruption, and an interruption would be if an enemy controls either a planet or a gate. So remember that these are planets, and then gates are going to be the numbered sort of areas toward the middle of the board. So if an enemy controls any of those, that's going to stop your catapult movement. But catapult movement can be used to move really great distances with only using one sort of pip of movement. What's interesting about a catapult move is that you can take any number of ships and drop them off as you go, but you cannot pick up any additional ships on the way. So as an example, if we want to perform a catapult move from this starport, I'm going to take my fleet of 4 ships, I'm going to expend 1 pip on a movement action, and I'm going to catapult them into space. So thus I take 1 sort of move, and this is all going to be in the same move action. Then I can move to this next location, and if I wanted to, my fleet could move to this planet, and since it's not controlled by anything, I can continue this catapult movement to another planet, and then I can continue this catapult movement to this planet, and so on and so forth. And the reason that I can do that is because nothing is interrupting me. So no enemy forces, no enemy opponents are actually controlling any of the locations that I was moving through. Now, if they did, that would stop the catapult movement. So this is a really powerful way to get from one side of the board to the other. So as a basic strategy, I'm going to really try to hammer this home for you. When I see people play this game, when they spread out across the galaxy, they try to just really stay contained in a small area of the board. If you need a resource and it's, let's say, all the way across the board, you can use a catapult movement to get you to far places on the board with using a minimal amount of movement. And so that's a fantastic way to get, let's say, your pieces from down here all the way up here, basically on one of your turns. So think of it that way, is that you're not really confined by a lot of the traditional movement rules that you find in a lot of the games. So don't be afraid to spread out and take resources that you really need to sort of maximize the strategy in what you're going to perform. Consequently, and I'm going to say this, and some people don't necessarily buy into this, but if you place ships at gates and you control those gates, you're going to be disrupting catapult movements from your opponents, which is a fantastic way to keep people from rapidly spreading out. Another thing that you can do is if you place if you place your ships at the gate, then it makes it harder for your opponents to move in and attack some of your stuff at the planets in the corresponding system. So you can kind of like set up traps. You can set up just a few pieces out in the middle to help you control movement from your opponents. It's actually really powerful, especially if you are a player that likes having ships out. Like I myself like having all of my ships out as much as possible over the course of the game. You can use a few of your ships to disrupt enemy movement. All right, so we're going to talk about catapult movement and specifically disrupting your opponents when you're actually moving. We're going to go back to our yellow player. We have our starport. We're going to perform a catapult movement from this location, and we're going to try to spread out more toward the right-hand side of the board. There are some tokens that I'm going to have a quick conversation about. These are the arrow tokens that you're going to see, and they're present in the game at various locations depending upon the setup card that you have. So if you see one of these, it's going to make the two gates next to it considered adjacent. So as an example, this gate right here is adjacent to this gate up here. You don't actually stop on this location at all. It's considered outside the game and you never stop on it. So if you ever move, you move from here to here. Okay, those two different gates are considered adjacent. So in this example, we are going to perform a catapult move from this yellow planet using our starport. We're going to move our fleet into the gate area, and then we are going to move past this arrow marker, and then we're going to hit this location right here. Because this gate is controlled by the blue player, so it's controlled prior to us moving ships into it, it's going to disrupt our catapult movement. So it doesn't matter that we have more ships that are entering into this gate. What matters is who controls it prior to anybody moving into the gate area. So since the blue player controls it prior to movement into it, it disrupts the catapult movement. So that's not necessarily the end of the world. So as an example, on our mobilization card, we have 4 pips. So that would have consumed 1 pip to get to this location. We can continue our movement, but it just kind of stops us from continuing to catapult. So then we could take our ships and then move them, consequently using additional movement pips. Next strategy tip I'm going to talk about is called creative movement. In ARCs, I see a lot of times a person kind of stumbling around a little bit when it comes to understanding what a catapult move does in the game. And so, like, as an example, if the blue player is trying to get over to the right-hand side of the board and they play a move card, they're literally, going like 1 and then 2 and then 3, and they're kind of slowly moving around the board. And oftentimes I see that literally the ships they're trying to move is right next to a starport. So instead of literally moving these ships all the way around, they could do movement creatively by, let's say, catapulting 2 of the ships out of this sector and then around, and then you can move these ships in to reinforce it, to back reinforce it. So think of the starports as a really good way to get around and move around on the board. Next up, I'd like to have a conversation about the administration cards, which I have on the screen currently. This type of suit in ARCs has 3 different types of actions that you can perform. We have tax, repair, and influence present on the card. We've already talked about repair, so now we're going to go ahead and dive into tax. Alrighty, it's time to talk about tax. When you think about taxation, I want you to only think about the cities that are on the game board itself. That's what we're going to be focusing on. We don't actually focus on the starports for the tax action. So whenever you see that tax action, make sure you are looking directly at cities. And also be clear, you can tax any city on the game board, whether it's your city or not. It just depends on if you control the actual planet or not, which is kind of an interesting mechanic in the game. So first off, we're going to start with sort of a generalized explanation of tax. So I'm going to focus on the white player. We have this planetary system, and we have 3 ships in orbit around the system. Please note, too, that, and I'm going to try to zoom in on this, there is an icon for each and every planet, and it's kind of color-coded to what the resource that's associated with the planet is. So for this one, it's fuel, and I'm just going to pop over to this blue planet over here, and notice that the planet itself is blue, and that's going to correspond to the relic resource in the game. So each and every planet, and I'll go ahead and just pop over to this one. This one has the material icon on it. So whenever you perform a tax action, understand that it's going to key off of whatever city is attached to that given planet. So when I perform a tax right here, I just simply have to have control of the city. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a resource corresponding to what it actually is. So in this case, we're going to take one of the fuel resource icons, and I'm going to go ahead and place it onto my board. And notice that I only have 3 open slots on my game board to facilitate actual resources, so I'm just going to move them from spot to spot so you can kind of see that as the viewer. So it's imperative over the course of the game that as you start removing these additional slots by placing cities onto the game board by using build actions, and that's something that we've talked about previously, it's going to actually unlock additional slots for resources. So as an example, if I take this city off, notice it's going to unlock 2 slots for additional resources. And then when you get toward the right hand side of the game board, it's going to unlock these 2 additional scoring potentials. Let's see if it will zoom in and come into focus. Okay, so it actually does. Notice that if you have this one unlocked, it's going to give you +2 power points or victory points if you win the ambition. And then consequently, if you have them both unlocked, it's going to add +2 and +3, so thus a total of +5 if you win the ambition. Please note that that only applies if you're winning the ambition. If you come in second place, it won't actually trigger these. So there's kind of a race when you're playing ARX to unlock a lot of the positions on your game board so you can get into these higher scoring areas. It is fairly difficult though to unlock actually both of these 2. And the reasoning behind it is you have to have a lot of ships on the table and you have to own a lot of territory. So it's not that easy to unlock these 2 positions on the board. Next, I'm going to give you an example of taxing an enemy city, and this is kind of an interesting mechanic that exists in the game, and I think it's actually fairly fun. So now we're going to focus on this planet, and notice that we have this orange city on the planet, and also notice that we have an orange ship that's the defender here, and it has been damaged and it's laying on its side. We are playing the white player currently, and we're in this planetary system. So when I perform a tax action on this planet, I'm actually going to be taxing an enemy city. And kind of the caveat behind this is that you can tax an enemy city if you actually control that planet. So in this case, we have 3 undamaged fresh warships that are sitting right there, and then our enemy actually has a damaged ship. So the white player controls the system, and there is an enemy city present there, and thus the white player is going to perform a tax action. So this is going to behave the same manner that we saw previously. We're going to take a corresponding resource, which is going to be this material resource, and notice that it matches the icon on the planet. And then we're going to go ahead and pop down to our board, and it gets placed onto our game board in an open position. Now there's a secondary thing that occurs when you tax an enemy city, and it's kind of like you're taking a hostage. And basically what you're doing is you're taking a captive. So I'm going to put this sort of marker onto the screen. These are enemy agents, and we're going to go ahead and take that and claim that. We're going to claim 1 for every enemy city that we tax. And then we're just going to simply take that and we're going to place it onto our game board in that captive's position. And so notice I'm going to take this orange captive and I'm going to now place it into this box right here. And you might say to yourself, well, what's the purpose of that? Well, having captives is an important portion of scoring what's called that tyrant ambition. And we kind of talked about this previously, but I'm going to go ahead and zoom over onto the game board itself. And notice that it has the little handcuff icon, which means that you've captured an enemy agent. So it says captives return in the cleanup phase. So whoever has the most number of captives will win the tyrant ambition, and then consequently the second number of captives will earn the second position on this. And then the only caveat is that if you don't actually score this ambition, the captives are going to remain on your board for a while. Okay, so they're going to remain as a captive until that ambition is actually scored. So kind of to sum it up, when you do a tax action, it's a little bit more complicated than what you would have originally thought. So we have the fact that you're taking a resource and you're now taking a captive of an enemy, and it all keys off of the fact that you have a bunch of ships and you control that actual planet. So think 3-dimensionally when you're playing ARX. Remember that in move actions, you could potentially go all over the entire span of the board if you have enough movement. So you could really take your ships and basically land them at an enemy location, and then in a subsequent turn, you can actually perform a taxation. So think three-dimensionally when you play ARX, and think about, hey, you could possibly tax anything on the board that has a city. That's going to give you a huge advantage on your overall strategy. All right, so now that we have an understanding of how taxing works, there is a caveat to this, and it's a little bit subtle. And that subtlety is that only once per turn can you tax each city. So as an example, I went ahead and I placed out all of these tokens onto the board. And remember that we have this administration card, and let's say we have a tax with 4 pips on it, and that means that we can perform 4 tax actions over the course of the turn. Well, here's the caveat. I can't tax a city more than once per turn. So even though I have 4 pips on my action card, I can't tax this city 4 times and get 4 fuel resources. I can only tax this once. So what this does is that it kind of forces you to expand over the course of the game, because you can only perform 1 tax action per city per turn. But what that means is that you can actually do this on enemy cities as well. So let's kind of go ahead and just go over that scenario. So if I have 4 tax actions, I could perform 1 action here to tax an enemy city. I could perform a second tax action to tax this city right here. And then finally, on the right-hand side of the screen, I could perform 2 tax actions on this planet and get 2 relic icons, because I could tax each city 1 time over the course of that turn. So there is a way that you can get the same resource twice on a given turn, but you have to have a city for each. So as an example, if I remove some of these cities from the game board, and if I have 4 tax actions, I can't tax this one twice and I can't tax this one twice. It's only once per city per turn. Next, we're going to talk about influence actions, and specifically the court in the game. So what I have is a set of 4 cards on the table to kind of simulate what the court looks like as part of the game of ARX. Think of the court as where all the guilds come together, and this is almost kind of like you send your agents there to exert influence on the guilds, and then the guilds will actually join you. So we have 2 different cards that can exist in the court. The first one is going to be a guild card, and these are going to be the most prevalent. You're going to notice at the bottom of the card, it has the word guild written on it. In addition to that, we also have Vox cards, in which Vox is written on the bottom. Guild cards will come into play and move under a player's control, and they're thus actually moved into the play area when a player claims those. The Vox cards are basically a one-time sort of event that goes off, and then it's put into the discard pile. It usually gives you some pretty cool benefit or bonus, but it's just a one-time bonus. So next we're going to talk about how to actually take and claim these different types of cards in the game. So the first thing that we're going to do is perform what's called an influence action. So present in the game ARX, you're going to see that each of the players has these tokens in their supply bins, and these are known as agents. So think of it as we're going to send agents to influence these different cards actually in the court. I think it's a pretty cool mechanism. So as an example, if I want to influence one of these guilds or try to claim this Vox card, I need to have the most number of agents on the card in order to take control of it. So kind of as we were talking about before with ships, you have to have the highest number of agents on one of these cards, and thus at a subsequent step in the game, you can perform what's called a secure action. I'll get into that a little bit later. So right now we're just going to focus on influencing a card. So as an example, if I perform an influence action, I can take one of my agents and put it on a card. Then I can perform this action sort of numerous times. So I get to choose whether I want to put one agent on one card, or I could actually put multiple agents on the same card. Now, there's no real need to put 3 agents on a card unless you're really convinced that your opponents really want that card and they're going to start placing agents on it as well. So as an example, you could get into almost like a bidding war with one of the other players. So let's say that this is going back and forth, and maybe the white player has 3 agents on one card and the blue player has 3 agents on the card. If we are tied for control, neither of the players can secure that card. But if you have the most number of agents on a card, so as an example, the white player has 3 agents present on a card, the blue player only has 2 agents present on this card, and as a result of that, you can take control of it if you have the white player, and thus you can perform a secure action. Now, what happens when you secure is that you're going to take these other enemy agents captive, and they're going to be placed in your captives bin. So I'll probably go through the nuances of secure more in line with the aggression cards and the aggression suit, but I'll just kind of give you a quick overview of what happens. If I perform a secure action and I target this card, the white player is going to take all of their agents and return them to the supply. And then what they're going to do is they're going to take any enemy agents and then put them in their captives box on their game board. So we're going to go ahead and place them into the captive section of their game board. And once again, the captive section is going to correspond to the tyrant ambition. So thus, if you have the highest number of captives at the end of a chapter, you're going to score that ambition. Next, we're going to move over to the court, and we're going to take this card, and it's going to go into play into the white player's area right here. Please notice that it has a fuel icon in the top right. And these are going to also add to the Tycoon ambition at the end of a round if it's scored. So if you can remember the Tycoon ambition, which is located at the top of the ambitions track, notice that it has a fuel icon. And then also notice that this guild card has a fuel icon. And then also notice that this resource has a fuel icon on it as well. So when you move to scoring that ambition, please note that it's going to be all of the icons that you have. So all of your fuel icons are going to add to this. So what's great about having guild cards, it's going to add to your overall amount of a given resource when you're scoring ambitions. Also located on the card, and I'm just going to mention this right now, there are key icons, and this is going to be a way that you can see if a card is stolen from you. You can also steal guild members from other opponents. We're going to go into that in the combat phase. And then also too, we're going to notice that we have now the term prelude. So a prelude sort of action is something that you can perform in between placing your action card on the board. So I'm going to take an action card, I'm going to place it out into the play area, and it's the prelude step is then right after you place your action card, but before you play any actions is when you can trigger a lot of these different events. So now this guild card gives you the ability to do something kind of at the start of your turn before you start performing any actions. So just note that if I took this guild card on my turn, it can't technically trigger until my next prelude phase, which will be at the beginning of my next turn. So I can't necessarily utilize it the turn it comes into play. So notice that there's going to be a lot of different effects that trigger during the prelude phase. Something else that we haven't talked about, and we're going to talk about it really quickly, is that your resources can be spent. So as an example, I can spend this material icon to then perform something in my prelude phase. So we just really talked about prelude, and so we have a good understanding of when that phase occurs. So you can actually spend your resources, and this is a one-time spend. You would take it off your board, return it back to the supply, and then you could execute either a build or repair action. So this allows you to do sort of off-suit actions, so to speak. So as an example, if we're playing down an administration card, we can do tax, repair, or influence. If I wanted to spend this material resource, I could actually then perform a build action at the start of my phase, and then before I start doing any of my actions, which would be tax, repair, or influence, that would allow me to do a build action. Now, think about that from a taxation perspective. That's a pretty powerful thing. So as an example, I could spend this material resource during my prelude phase. I could go up to a corresponding area, and I could place now a city down into that position. And then what I could do is I could move on to taxation. So I could literally tax a city that I just put into play. So that's an amazing amount of sort of like combo ability. So when we start talking about Prelude, really what we're getting into is that the guild cards are pretty powerful because they have different special abilities you can play. Specifically in the Prelude actions, this is probably a better card to show you. In addition to that, you can start spending your resources in the Prelude sort of phase as well. This is where a lot of the strategy comes into play. When you're playing the game of Arcs, literally after you play down your action card, this is why I recommend go over and look at anything in your Prelude area and review everything that you could possibly do before you start playing those actions out. I think that's a great way to start really winning this game, is to start utilizing a lot of the stuff in the Prelude phase, and specifically by spending your resources. Next, we're going to start talking about the final suit of cards, the red suit of cards, which are the aggression cards that are present in the game. Notice that we have battle, move, or secure listed on these cards. And then also notice too that we have a number of pips associated. These aggression cards in general have typically less number of pips on them. And in my opinion, the aggression deck, the aggression suit, is one of the most important, if not the most important suit to have in the game. So we've already talked about move actions. Next, we're going to go into secure, and then finally, we're going to start talking about battles and combat. So at this point in the tutorial videos, you can understand that we've already talked about influencing, and influencing is a way to place agents onto cards. That's one action that you can perform in the game, but it doesn't give you the ability to take control of the card until you perform what's called a secure action. Secure actions are located on the red aggression cards. In addition to that, we also have the ability to perform a secure action by spending one of these relic resources during the Prelude phase of the game. And if you ever forget what all of the different resources do, they're just noted on your player board, and it tells you during your Prelude action you can spend a relic to perform one secure action. So keep that in mind as we go through the course of understanding how to secure. So we already gave examples of how you place different agents onto these cards into the court, and then thus you're able to take control of them by using a secure action. The most simple way to take control of a card is that you have to have the highest number of agents on a card. As an example, we have the Loyal Empaths card present on the table. We have 3 agents of our corresponding color. And so thus, if we wanted to perform a secure action, we would spend one of those actions. We would take off all of our agents and put them into our supply, and then we would take this card and place it into play. Immediately after we remove a card from the court, we go to the draw deck and we replace it and then put another one down. Next up, we have this card on the right-hand side of the screen, and please notice that there are no agents of the corresponding color present on it. We are playing the white player, and thus we cannot perform a secure action on this card because we have 0 agents actually on the card. You have to have at least 1 agent on a card to be able to secure it. So as an example, this call to action card in the court, if we were to do a secure action, we could take it, and then it would trigger what's called a when secured action. So if we were to take control of this card, it would trigger one time. It says draw 1 action card from the bottom of the action discard pile and discard call to action. So as you can see, this triggers one time, it goes into the discard pile, and then consequently we are going to replace it with another card from the draw deck. And so thus we're always going to have 4 cards in the court. If we're playing a 3 or 4 player game. In a 2-player game, there's only 3 of these cards present in the court at any one given time. Next up, we're going to talk about the Loyal Engineers card. And notice, since we're playing the white player, we have to have control of the card in order to take it and secure it. In this case, since there are 2 agents of each color on it, neither player has essentially influence control over this card, thus I cannot secure it. In addition to that, if let's say we were to have these 3 agents on the card, and thus the blue player only has 2 agents on the card, we could take control of this card. And then just please remember, anytime you secure a card, you're going to take the enemy agents, and then you're going to go ahead and drop them into your captives section of your game board. Thus, you can score the Tyrant ambition at the end of the chapter. Secure is a very important aspect of the game, and I think where a lot of new players really get derailed is that they wait to play an aggression card. So please be very cognizant of the fact that you can spend one of these relic resources to do a secure action in your prelude phase. This is a good way to gain control of the guild and to really secure and then play the box cards in the game. Always take that into consideration. A lot of times when we're playing, a lot of the newer players have these resources and they don't use them over the course of the whole game, and they could be using them intermittently to take and secure cards from the court. The final action that we're going to talk about is battle. And I left this at the end of all of the actions because I think it's probably the most difficult one to describe, and it's probably the most impactful for the game. I really feel that combat and battling in this game is very, very key to your victory. I think in a lot of different games that you can play, strategy games, there are ways to win the game without doing a lot of battling. I think in this game, you have to understand battling, and literally every game that we've played, every single player has engaged in battle. So Arx is definitely a game where you have to understand combat and battling, and you have to utilize it over the course of the game. The first note that I am going to make to you as a new player is to understand that there is a resource in the game called Weapon, that specifically what it does is it will add the battle keyword to the action card that you are playing. That is a very powerful and potent ability, and I want to mention it first before we actually get into the sort of combat ideology of what actually happens in the game. Please note that we have cards such as Mobilization that say Move or Influence, or any of the other 3 suits. They don't have battle actually listed on them. And please notice too that we have a large number of pips on this card. What you're going to see in your resources is that one of the resources is called Weapon. Weapon cannot be used to score any of the ambitions, so thus the fact that you have this resource, it does not help you score any of the other ambitions, with the exception of it allows you to fight and do some amazing things. So notice it says Weapon. This turn, your action card lets you battle, so it's going to add battle to whatever action card that you have. Battling in the game is very, very important, and please only notice that the red suit is the only card that has it. So if you do have weapons, spend those weapons. They don't really give you anything else, but it does allow you to battle on terms that you wouldn't normally be able to. My favorite time to use it is with mobilization cards, because the mobilization cards have the move action also. It's extremely impactful to be able to move and battle on the same turn. So try to spend your weapon resources to kind of almost like sneak attack the other players and do some amazing combat things to them. Next, I'm going to give you an overview of the 3 different types of dice that are present in Arx that are used for a battle action. Arx is kind of a unique game in which if you are the attacker, you are the aggressor, you are the person playing the battle action, you are the only player that are actually rolling the dice in this game. Every combat sort of game that you can play, the attacker gets to roll dice, the defender gets to roll dice. In Arx, only the person doing a battle action rolls the dice. And then the dice simulate what's happening to both the attacker and the defender as part of that battle action. So think of it as just like one set of dice rolls, and then the attacker and the defender are both going to suffer damage consequently as a result of what's being rolled. Something else that's very unique in Arx, if you are the person performing the battle action, you decide where every point of damage goes On both your ships and the defending ships, you get to choose where every single point of damage goes. That gives you a huge amount of control when you perform a battle action. It's kind of a cool mechanic. It's also extremely dangerous, so you want to make sure that if you're fighting people across the game board, you're the one that's initiating the battle actions and you're thus controlling it. So a very, very critical part of like understanding this game is what these different dice pools actually do. And I'm going to walk you through why we have 3 different color sets of dice and what they actually do. All right, so we have 3 different sets of dice, and I have 2 sort of at the top and then 1 at the bottom. The blue set of dice, these are going to be the skirmish dice. The skirmish dice for the attacker are basically 0 risk when you're doing an attack, or a battle action in the game. There is no way for you as the person performing the battle action to suffer damage in that combat. Now, the sort of caveat to that is that there are a lot of misses on these dice. So just understand that if you're rolling a skirmish die, you will hit roughly 50% of the time. 50% of the faces on these dice are hits, and then the other 50% are scratches or null. There's actually nothing actually on these. Next up, we have the assault dice, which are located on the right side, and these are the red dice. Assault dice are going to inflict more damage on your enemy, but you as the attacker have a chance of taking damage. And then finally, at the bottom part of the screen, we have what's called the raid dice. Please note that the raid dice can only be used if you're attacking a location where there are buildings present. So as an example, if we are the white player and we're attacking the orange player at this planet, we can use the raid dice to attack it at this location. If this city token is missing, we can't actually use the raid dice at that planet. I'm going to go ahead and go over a subtle sort of rules clarification when it comes to the raid dice. And literally the vast majority of the games of Arcs you're going to play, your opponents are going to have at least one building, so either a starport out or a city out on the game board. So thus, you can use the raid dice against those buildings. Now, in the rare instance that your opponent has absolutely no buildings out on the entire game board itself, you can use raid dice against them at any planet or at any location. So that's kind of one of the caveats. It's very, very rare that a player will get knocked down to such a weakened state that they have no buildings actually out on the game board. Here are some more basics of combat. We're going to be focusing on this planet right here. So we're going to say that we are the white player and that we are going to be attacking the yellow player. When you are performing a battle action, you get to roll 1 die per ship that you have present at the location for the battle. So what that means is that if you have 3 ships present at a planet or at a gate that you're performing an attack at, you can roll 1 die per ship that you have. And that's whether they're damaged or whether they're fresh. So it doesn't matter. You get to roll 1 die per ship that you have present. So as an example, if we are fighting at that location, you as the attacker get to decide what dice you're going to use. So in this case, maybe you want to use 3 of the blue dice because it's kind of like a safe attack. There's no way for you to deal any damage to yourself during that attack action. Maybe though you're feeling kind of aggressive and you want to roll all red dice. So in this case, we could do, 3 red dice. Or maybe you feel like you're going to perform a raid and then you could roll 3 of the orange dice. The other cool thing about doing a battle action, you get to choose what dice, and you can use dice from any of the pools that you want to. So as an example, if you wanted to, you could use 1 die from each of these pools, and then you would go ahead and roll these and see what happens. Or what you could do is kind of mix and match. Maybe you're saying, hey, I'm going to be a little bit more conservative during this attack, but maybe I want to use one of the red dice. So it gives you the ability to really sort of hone in on what you're doing, and you as the attacker choose what you want to do. The other powerful thing about this combat system is that if you perform a battle action, so let's say your first battle action, you're going to roll all blue dice, and you're going to do that to sort of soften up the enemy, so maybe get a couple hits off on their ships. Then on a subsequent battle action, you can change up what's in the pool. So maybe the first time you do an attack action, you roll all blues. The second time, maybe you roll all reds. And maybe if you have a third action, you just go straight to the raid dice. Or you can do a combination in any case with any of the battle actions that you perform. So just understand that every battle action that you perform, you can change what's in these pools of dice. It's very, very powerful. There's a lot of strategy involved with picking which dice pool you use, and it also adds a lot of fun and a lot of different dynamics to the game. Now I'm going to give you a quick overview of the different types of symbols you can see on these dice. The first one is going to be a hit. What this means is that if you are the attacker, you're the person performing the battle action, you get to inflict 1 point of damage on an enemy ship or an enemy building at the location that you're fighting at. I'll go over a little bit later the order in which these trigger. There's a very specific order in the rulebook on how you apply wounds. Next up, we're going to take a look at this icon, and I'm pointing at the little icon that looks like a flame that's present on these two different dice. What this means is that you, as the attacker, you as the person performing the battle action, you have to suffer 1 point of damage. This is basically simulating you attacked an enemy and they're firing back and they're shooting at you. Kind of what I mentioned before is that if you're performing the battle action, you roll the dice, and it's kind of simulating what the attacker and the defender are actually doing. Note too that these hit icons, they do not appear on the blue dice at all. So this is where some of the risk comes in. When I'm playing a blue die, I can only hit enemy ships, but the likelihood of hitting enemy ships is low because 50% of the faces on these dice are actually just blank. Next up, we have the hit icon again, so you're going to see this. It was the same one that's on the blue dice. And then the one below it, it is a hit icon, and there is a triangle in that. And that's a pretty easy sort of icon to understand because the buildings are triangular. This just simply means that a building is going to take a point of damage at the location itself. Next up, we have this circular icon, and this is known as the intercept icon. And I went ahead and just showed you that there's two different intercept icons you can see in the game. The one up on top, what this icon means is that you as the attacker performing the battle action are going to hit one of the enemy ships. And then the one below it just simply doesn't have a hit in it, but notice that the circle around, that's going to be the intercept icon. Now this icon is very dangerous to roll when you are performing a battle action, and I'm going to go ahead and show you why. So at the location that we're fighting above, we have 3 white, fresh warships that are undamaged, and then at the bottom of the screen, we also have 3 fresh yellow warships that are undamaged. When you roll this intercept icon, what this is simulating is that the defending player is hitting your ships, and they can inflict a massive amount of damage. So for every fresh ship that the defender has, you as the attacker are going to suffer 1 point of damage. So in this example right here, since we have 3 fresh defending ships, and if we roll this intercept icon, what that means is we're going to suffer as the attacker 3 points of damage. That is a lot of damage to sustain. Now the caveat behind rolling this intercept icon is that you only suffer a point of damage for fresh ships that the defender actually has. So as an example, if all of the defending ships are damaged and the intercept icon is rolled, you as the attacker suffer 0 points of damage. Intercept only works on fresh ships. So as an example, maybe we're fighting a combat, we have 2 damaged ships and we have 1 fresh ship. If we roll the intercept icon, What that means is that the white player is only going to suffer 1 point of damage from this attack. So the number of ships present that are fresh can really inflict a massive amount of damage if you're the aggressor. So that's extremely important for you to understand. The other thing for you to understand is that the intercept icon only triggers 1 time. So let's say we roll 2 intercept icons. We're only going to say that the intercept triggers once over the course of that battle round. It's not going to trigger twice. So as an example, if I roll these 2 intercept icons and we're having this battle right here, we would only inflict 3 points of damage to the attacker 1 time. The second intercept icon is just going to simply be ignored. So intercept can't occur more than once during the course of the battle round. Now the final symbol that I'm going to show you has a key icon on it. And as I mentioned before, there are cards in the game, and there's also resources listed in the game with keys actually on them. So as an example, I'm going to pop this guild card into the field of focus, and notice it has 2 keys on it. If I were to roll 2 key icons, so as an example, maybe I roll this die, and see how it has 2 keys on it. I, as the attacker, could steal something worth 2 keys from the defender. I could actually then take this guild card from them and put it into my player area. Something else that you could do is you can steal resources. So as we see on the game boards at the top, notice that there's keys listed. So this one's got 3, this one has 1, 1, 2, 1, and then 3. So if I were to roll, let's say 2 key icons, I could potentially steal multiple resources from a player. So as an example, maybe they have these 2 resources on their battle board. I would then be able to steal 1 key worth of stuff and then a 2nd key worth of stuff from them. I would take these resources from them and I could transfer those to my battle board. That's sort of the raid action. We're stealing, we're kind of, taking stuff from our opponent as part of a battle action. So as you can see, the way that dice are rolled in the game is very important. So thus, you as the attacker have to pick what that dice pool looks like, and then based upon what is randomly rolled, then you go ahead and resolve the battle. So next I'm going to go through the sort of order of operations. When all these symbols are rolled, it looks pretty complex. But in the rulebook itself and the cheat sheets, there's a quick sort of tutorial that I'll go through to show you what the order of operations actually is. In the core game of ARX, you're going to notice that there are 4 sheets. These are reference sheets, and one of them can be given to each player. In the sort of the center of this cheat sheet, you're going to notice that it has the order of operations that occurs on how you resolve the different icons in the game of ARX. So as an example, let's just imagine that we rolled all of our dice. We're going to start at the top of this chart and we're going to apply hits, just starting from the top row, and then we're just going to progress all the way down until we resolve absolutely everything. So when you're playing ARX for the first couple of games, go ahead and use this reference sheet on how to actually activate each of the different die faces, and it gives you an example of when to actually do that. So notice though that the first thing that you're going to do is use the flame icon. So your ship is going to suffer damage first, and then we're going to move to the intercept icon. So really what's happening is that you as the attacker, you're going to suffer damage first as a part of this battle. And then once you resolve those 2, then you're going to hit ships first. So any of those hits that you have are going to be transferred over to the ships themselves. Now, you can't hit buildings unless you actually roll the building icon. Now, if you have excess hits on ships, and let's say you wipe out the entire enemy fleet and maybe you have extra hits, those then can be allocated to buildings, but you have to hit ships first. That's really what that sort of note means. Then you're going to hit buildings. And then finally, at the end, you're going to activate your keys, which you can use to steal guild cards, because they have the key icons on them. Or what you can do is steal resources from the player board. As we kind of mentioned before, that's why the key icons are actually located on these player boards. So now that you have like a kind of overall idea of the flow of combat, I'm going to go ahead and bring it all together. I'm going to show you an example combat with the yellow and the white player at the planet that we've been talking about. This is where we bring it all together. We're going to say it's the white player's turn. They play this card, this aggression card, has the battle action on it, and there's 3 pips, so we're going to do 3 battle actions. White player is the attacker, yellow player is the defender. So in this case, I can take up to 3 dice and roll them. I'm going to go ahead and grab 3 blue dice. I'm going to go ahead and roll those. And what I rolled are 3 hits. So now I'm going to reference my hit sheet, and I'm just going to start from top to the bottom. I have no flame icons. I have no intercept icons. Next, I go to hit ships first. So I have 3 points of damage I can inflict upon the enemy. If I wanted to, I could remove a warship from the table and then inflict 1 point of damage on the ship as well. Now, as a general sort of rule for strategy, I'm going to let you all know what I'm going to do. Instead of taking 1 piece off the board, I'm going to go ahead and damage each of the warships. So in this example, I don't have any fresh enemy opponent ships now present at this system. What that means is that if I roll an intercept die, so I'm going to go ahead and put those onto the screen, it means that the defender is going to hit me for 0 points of damage because they have 0 fresh ships. So in this battle example, for my second sort of battle action, I'm going to amp up the pressure at this location. And now I'm going to roll a combination of dice. I'm going to roll 1 blue die and then 2 red dice. So I'm going to go ahead and roll those. And here are the results from those attacks. Notice I have a flame icon and then I have a bunch of hits present on the dice. I'm going to go over to my sort of like battle roster thing right here. I do have 1 hit on one of my ships. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to one of my ships, and I'm going to now damage that ship. And then for the other dice I've got 4 hits showing. So what I'm going to do at this point is I have to allocate hits. So these hits, I have to allocate them to ships first, then I can move on to damaging the base. So in this case, I'm going to destroy all of the enemy ships. Now, what happens to those ships when I defeat them? They're going to be placed on the trophy section of my game board. So thus, I now have 3 trophies. And this icon right here is the Warlord icon. There is an ambition located on the ambition tracker that I can score and get victory points / power points if I have the greatest number of trophies. So now I'm looking at the system that I'm at. I have 1 extra point of damage. I'm going to take this city, I'm going to flip it over, and notice that the corners on this triangle now are black, which means that the city itself is damaged. Now that the sort of enemy has been softened up significantly, for my 3rd battle action, I'm going to roll the orange dice instead, because maybe I want to steal some resources before I wipe out their city. So here is what I got when I rolled those dice. Notice that I have 2 intercept icons. Since the enemy no longer has any fresh ships, these are just simply going to be ignored. Next, I'm going to go over to sort of my battle tracker, and it says the order of operations. I have this icon which says hit your ship. So one of my ships is going to take a point of damage. I'm going to go ahead and flip this one onto its side. Next, then, I'm going to look at what happens next. And this icon indicates that a point of damage goes over to the enemy building. So this city has now been destroyed, and it is taken as a trophy by the white player to be placed into this section of the game board. Since I just destroyed a city, I now have to activate an additional rule in the game, and in which the sort of galaxy is outraged at what I've just done, because I completely annihilated a city and completely took it off the map and destroyed it. So I'm seen as an aggressive player, and thus outrage is going to be suffered as a result of my actions. Next, we're going to talk about outrage. In the previous video clip, the white player annihilated everything at this planet, and they did destroy a city. The first thing that we're going to note is that the icon listed on this planet is a material icon, and that's going to be important on how we deal with Outrage moving forward. So I'm going to go ahead and move over to the player board for the white player. And a couple things are going to happen. Since I destroyed a city that was rich with materials on a planet, what that means is that I have to go in and get rid of anything with a material icon on it. So this gets removed from my player board. In addition, this guild card gets removed from my play area. And then what I'm going to do is I have to take one of my agents, and I'm going to have to place it on my player board to block that corresponding resource. So I'm going to take the agent and I'm going to place it on top of the material icon on this section of the game board. What this means is that for the remainder of the game, and this is for literally the remainder of the game, I will not be able to spend any material resources at all. So I can still acquire the material resource, but I cannot spend this as a prelude action, which is listed right here on the board. It also says, and it gives you a reminder here, it says outraged resources cannot be spent for their prelude action. Outrage is described in the battle action. So if you ever forget, it's literally listed on your player board. After performing the outrage step in the destruction of the city, it is then going to proceed on to what's called ransacking the court. So as an example, I went ahead and just put the court onto the table. Notice that we have multiple types of captives present. The white player has annihilated the yellow city, so I went ahead and took the city off the game board and put it in the trophy area. Now what they're going to do is they're going to be able to take one of these cards that has any number of agents from the defending player actually on it. So please note that the defending player in this attack was the yellow player, and so the white player gets to claim any card from the court that has any number of yellow agents actually on it. That's a pretty powerful thing, and we're going to go ahead and just go through it. So what would be an advantage to the yellow player could be one of two things. One, they like the card more than the other one. So in this case, the white player could take either of these cards as a ransacking sort of action. They can't actually take these other two cards because there are no yellow agents on those cards. So what you can do is look to see what the advantage would be. If you take this card, you're going to get agents. Now, in this case, you're not going to take the agents as captives. They're going to be war trophies. So this is kind of a strange sort of thing that can happen in the game. So as an example, the white player is going to take this card. So all of these come off and they go into the trophy box as opposed to going into the captive box. And then this card itself gets taken and then put in the white player's area. They have actually claimed this card from the court. We're actually going to go through a second battle example using the same scenario just to kind of show you some of the variability that's present in the game and some of the decision making that could actually occur as part of this. So in this example, we're going to do things a little bit differently. The white player is going to be, fairly aggressive and is going to attack this system. So instead of using 3 blue dice for the initial battle, they're going to use 3 red dice, and we're going to go ahead and see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and roll those dice, and we're going to see kind of what happens. So this is what happened in the next case. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in, and I'm going to try to organize these dice in the sort of order of operations. Zoom in a little bit. So notice I got significantly more hits against the enemy, but I also rolled an intercept icon. So now we're going to go over to our little cheat sheet right here and start resolving the sort of damage that's occurring. We have 1 flame icon that's present, which means that the attacker is going to suffer 1 point of damage. And me being the person rolling, I get to decide where all the damage goes. So one of the white ships is now going to be impacted. Next up, we have the intercept icon, which is the circle around this hit. And what that means is that the attacking player is going to suffer 1 point of damage for every fresh defending ship. This is a pretty massive hit, and this is pretty dangerous for the white player. They just suffered 3 points of damage. So I'm going to say first point of damage goes here, second point of damage goes here, and now they lose a ship. So in this case, what's kind of interesting about this battle, the yellow player is now going to gain the trophy. They essentially fought and took one of these white ships off the board as a part of a battle action. And although the yellow player did not initiate the battle, they still were able to take out an enemy ship, and thus it's claimed as a trophy. So as you can see right now, that was a lot of damage that the white player had to suffer. Now we're going to take a look at the dice and resolve the normal hits. Please note that there's 4 hits present on those dice, so the white player can decide where all of those points of damage go. So they're going to rotate 1 ship, 2 ships, 3 ships, and then the 4th point of damage is going to take this ship off as a trophy, and it's going to end up on the white player board. So now we have a situation in which there's a lot of damage on the table, like predominantly that has occurred due to the white player's actions. And now it's time for the white player to make a decision on what to do next. So the white player suffered a heavy amount of damage during that attack. So they only have 2 ships left, so they can roll 2 dice. They're deciding to maybe tone it down a little bit, and they're going to roll a blue and a red die. I'm going to go ahead and roll them, and then we're going to see what happens. So we're going to pop over to the side, and this is what happened. So they get 1 flame icon and then 2 hits. We're going to go back to our little cheat sheet and see that hitting your own ships occurs first. We're going to go back up to the game board, and thus here's what was rolled. 1 point of damage is going to go to the white player. This comes off, and it's going to go into the yellow player's area as a trophy. Next up, we have 2 points of damage showing, and so the white player is going to annihilate the remaining 2 ships. And thus, here's what the battle presence looks like at this area in this location. Now, for the 3rd battle action, the white player is going to roll one of these orange die, and we're going to see kind of what happens. So we're going to go ahead and roll it. Okay. And then this is what was rolled. Let me go ahead and get this on the screen and zoom in on it. So this is an interesting die roll. This is basically showing that the intercept icon was rolled, and then we have 2 sort of like raid icons that were rolled as well. So we're going to go over to our handy little cheat sheet, and we're going to say that we're going to have to suffer intercept. We're going to go back to our location, and since there are no orange fresh ships left, the intercept icon is basically ignored, and the white player doesn't suffer any damage. Next, they can progress on and perform a raid action against the yellow player. They have 2 keys that they can spend against the yellow player themselves. So this is the yellow player's play area, and now we can spend those 2 keys to steal stuff from the yellow player. There's a couple different things that we could do. In this example, we could steal this card, and thus the guild card would then go up to the white player, and they would have control of it. Or what we could do is start stealing resources. So notice that there's 1 key icon in this position, there's 1 key icon in this position. We could spend both of our keys and take these resources. The resources would then be able to go up to the yellow player's player board. And during these steal actions, when you're taking stuff from players, if you have, like, let's say maxed out positions, so I'm going to say that in this case, maybe this city was present on the player board, and thus they couldn't take all the resources. You can discard a resource and take a new one, and whenever you do that, you can rearrange these icons to whatever position you want. Now, why would you do that? Well, because somebody could steal resources from you, so you can choose which resource is more important to you. So maybe you really like the relic resources, and for your strategy, you need that as opposed to something else. So in this case, we went through a slightly different battle scenario, and you can see how different these battles turned out as a result of what dice were actually rolled. In the first example, the white player was able to completely annihilate everything at the system. They suffered outrage, and they also didn't take very much damage. In the second example that we gave, the white player suffered a heavy amount of damage, but they were able to steal resources or a guild card. And notice too, they left the city intact, which means that the white player doesn't have to suffer outrage. So it's completely up to the attacking player to choose how they spend all of those different battle pips on their red aggression cards. And based upon what they roll, can severely change the outcome of the battle. At this point, I just want to go through a quick strategy tip when it comes to fighting your enemy, and they have a lot of fresh ships. So we've kind of gone over this combat example a couple times. So kind of what I recommend doing is that if you have a decent number of battle actions, what you can do is sort of soften up their fleet, so to speak. And what that means is that, like on the first battle, you can roll, let's say, 3 of these dice, and you have 0 risk. Really, one of the hardest things in the game is to overcome the intercept icon, which is this circular icon that you see. You can suffer a lot of damage as the attacker. So kind of what I recommend is that you can like soften up their fleet. You just roll, let's say, 3 of these battle dice on the first battle round. What you can do is essentially damage 2 of their ships. And then if you do use an intercept, or you do use a red dice in subsequent attacks, even if you roll an intercept, you're only going to suffer 1 point of damage because there's only 1 fresh ship. So think of it as like every battle round affords you the opportunity to change up your tactics. Some players I've noticed will only use blue dice, which I don't think is necessarily the best idea. And then other players will be very conservative. So like if they were the white player, they would roll another round of attacks to essentially wound these ships. And then on the third round of combat, they're going to go all in and just do all reds. So as an example. And notice that 2 intercept icons were rolled. So in this case, the intercept icons are completely nullified because all of the ships are damaged. And then in this case, 4 hits are rolled. It would wipe off everything on the table and then also wound the city as well. Another thing that you can do when you are in combat is that you can focus on just taking down 1 ship at a time. And that's a possibility of something you can do as well. So if your objective is to really just gain a trophy, so like a war trophy, you could put just all of your attacks into 1 ship and pull it off immediately, and then not really have to worry about the other parts of the battle. And you could just simply keep rolling blues over and over again and take 1 ship off at a time. So if your intent is to really just take trophies, you can do it safely by using the blue dice. If you really want to annihilate them, you can start using the red and then the orange dice. Next up for a strategy tip, and this is going to be for you as a player defensively and you as a player offensively, do not only have 1 starport over the course of the game. I see a lot of new players really struggle with this, and basically what happens is they get a little bit sort of overzealous and they start spreading out across the galaxy, and they'll leave 1 ship at their starport and they only have 1 starport. It's very easy for an enemy fleet to roll in and wipe out this starport. If you lose your only starport, you lose your ability to create any additional ships, and it can basically cripple you for the entire game. And I've seen this numerous times, and every single time I've taught this game, I kind of like tell people, I'm like, hey, don't just leave, 1 starport on the table. It's a really dangerous move. And time and time again, players do it, and then some other player comes in and just like hits them really hard, and they're basically kind of crippled for a hefty portion of the game. And in one case, I saw the player was completely crippled, and then the other players just kind of picked on that player and wiped out every single ship. There was nothing left of that player on the table. They were just like bullied that player and completely wiped out everything. So just be really careful and cautious to have multiple starports out. Like I myself like having a ton of ships out, so I'd recommend about 3 starports. And a lot of players say, oh no, you only need 1 or 2 starports over the course of the game. Just remember, if you take a really heavy hit and you can build back ships that are full strength, that's better than a repair action. A repair action heals 1 point of damage. If you build though, you can build a fresh ship and use it in combat. So think of it that way. The other thing too is that be mindful of enemies that only have one starport out and let's say they leave it undefended, like the white player. Make sure that you take advantage of that, and you can get a trophy from them. You can also wipe out their starport, and you also don't suffer any consequences for taking a starport off. It's only outrage on a city, so you can take a starport off and not suffer the consequences of outrage. Be very mindful of that. The next strategy tip I'm going to give you is called avoiding a bidding war. I don't know what causes this, and I've seen this a million times in this game. People will start putting their agents on cards, and then the next player does it, and then the next player does it, and then pretty soon you've got a card with a ridiculous number of agents actually on it. Whereas like other cards that are in the court, there's basically nothing on them, or like there's one or two agents actually on them. Try to avoid getting into massive bidding wars. So there's a couple reasons for that. So the first reason is that you only have a limited number of agents in your supply. So if you have a bunch of your agents actually locked down on one card, it removes the ability for you to be actually versatile. So think of it this way, you got 10 agents total that you can use. If you've got 4 of them locked down just on this one card, it gives you very little versatility on the rest of the cards in that court. And then something else that can happen in the game is that you might have a bunch of your agents that have been taken captive as well. So if you have 4 locked down on this card, then maybe you have an additional, couple sitting on this card. So maybe you're the yellow player and the white player has taken a couple captives. That means that 6 out of 10 of your agents are basically locked down and you can't do anything with them. The other caveat is also if you lose this card, remember you're going to lose all of those agents to an enemy, and those are going to be stuck actually in their captive box on their card until the actual tyrant objective is scored. So this is a little bit of a subtlety, so I'll go ahead and just back this up. So let's say this card gets taken, and maybe it's by the white player. So then the white player amasses all of these agents as captives on their card, and they take theirs off, and then they take the guild card itself. What means is that these are locked down until the tyrant objective is actually scored. And this is a subtlety in the game, so I'm going to go ahead and just point to this. It says captives return in cleanup. So the captives only go back to the other player's supply from the game board if this ambition is actually selected. If this ambition is not selected, these captives remain on the card chapter after chapter after chapter until the actual tyrant is scored. That's a subtlety to the game that's pretty hard to comprehend and pretty hard to understand. So if the white player has all these captives, they can cause a lot of harm to the other two players because now they can't play a lot of their agents up into the court because they don't have anything to actually play. The same thing can happen with trophies. So specifically, your warships can get stuck and locked down also in the sort of like trophy area on the board. And these get locked down also until the warlord ambition is actually scored. So this says the same thing. Trophies return in cleanup, but only if this ambition is selected for the given chapter. So you can also start suffering sort of like shortages on your ships because they're stuck on people's player boards as trophies. So that you can't even build these ships because they're actually locked down on this board, and you can't take them because they're not active in your supply. So for both your agents and your ships, think of it this way: be very, very careful and cautious if you start losing a bunch of these because it's going to impact your overall supply. Another combo I want you to think about is using your fuel in the prelude phase to essentially get you in a proper position to attack or to actually build something. So think of it this way. This aggression card only has 2 pips and it says battle or move. So a lot of times what happens is that you spend one of your pips to move and then you battle. So you basically only can do 1 battle. But what happens if you use the fuel sort of thing to get your fleet into position. Now you can use both the pips on the card to actually battle. So that's going to give you an extra battle step, which is fantastic. Another thing that is really critical too, and this works really well, is that we have a construction card right here, which construction cards are great, but what makes it even better is that if you can move to a new location with a set of your ships and then build something. So what combos really well with this is that you move a bunch of your ships from a starport. You can move them a really great distance by simply just using this one fuel resource. So you can use your catapult ability to get them really far across the galaxy, and then when they end up there, they can immediately build. That's pretty fantastic. Now, where that works really well is that a lot of these positions on the board, and you can see these, there's numerous ones, but they actually have 2 open positions for building. So imagine how impactful it would be if you could spend this fuel resource. You could then catapult a group of ships to a location and then build 2 different things. So you could put down maybe a city and a starport. I mean, that would be a pretty fantastic move, and that would be highly impactful for the game. So overall, I just want you to kind of keep in mind that one of the keys to winning this game is using your resources not haphazardly, but using your resources for key sorts of actions that you're doing to really cause a lot of impact. You have a limited number of these resources, so use them wisely, but you can really swing the game in your favor by just making a couple really good moves by spending a resource here and there and keeping in mind what they do. Now I'm going to talk about the overall game of Arcs. I think it's a very strong game, and it's a very fun game. One of the things I really like about it is that all of the actions that you perform in the game have been kind of simplified. Once you play a couple games of Arcs, you really understand all of the game mechanics, and every single player has access to all of those game mechanics because you're all using sort of this same deck of action cards over the course of the game. So once you have the core understanding of what each of the action cards does, that gives you a great foundation to start going into understanding how to use, let's say, your resources, and to do some combo turns where you're using resources in conjunction with some of your action cards. That's a pretty exciting aspect to the game. Something else that I really, really enjoy about the game is that they added the sort of like concept into the more advanced part of the game, where you have sort of a character with a unique special ability, and then you also have a lore sort of special ability. And what makes this super, super fun is that every time you play the game, you're going to have different combos of your leader as opposed to your lore cards. So there's a huge amount of variability. And that kind of takes the game from feeling very mechanical by using like the action cards that everybody has to making it kind of customized and making it more fun. So one of the aspects that I love about Arcs is that it has this sort of flair to it, which kind of reminds me of Root. Obviously, if you are looking at Arcs, you've probably played the game of Root, and you're probably looking at this game saying, hey, is this the right game for me? So I like Root because of its asymmetry, and what happens is that when you use these characters and these lore cards, that's where the asymmetry comes into play, and it's unique every time. So every single time I've played this game, it's felt unique. That's what's exciting about this game. So you have basic core mechanics, which are pretty easy to play in conjunction. Then you have sort of the asymmetrical side to it, which makes it very, very cool. So I highly recommend the Arcs base sort of core set. In addition to that, I also picked up this Leaders and Lore pack. And for the same reasons I just mentioned before, this just adds more variability. So it adds 8 leader cards and 14 additional lore cards into the game. So it's going to add more to the variability of the different combos that you can have when you play the game. Overall, fantastic game. I like how the ambitions change and the scoring changes every single chapter, and it's driven by the players. I think that's a very cool mechanic. Another mechanic I really enjoy, it is complex, but I love how you can mix up these battle dice and you can, kind of select every turn what you're rolling, and all sorts of different things happen. There's a lot of strategy involved with that. It's very, very cool. I love the combat mechanics. I love the ambitions. I also love the leaders in the lore. So overall, Arcs is a really cool game, and I highly recommend playing it. I want to thank everybody for joining me today, and as always, have fun gaming.